not what I think it is.
Now I've got your attention. The beauty and spectacle of playing Breath of the Wild. You can do all sorts of things. Relax and enjoy the scenery, piss off a guardian, defeat Ganondorf again, snap your crank if you know what I mean, shield surf down a big hill on a weak shield. You can do all sorts of things. But it still isn't Zelda CDI.
How about a kiss? For luck?
You've got to be kidding.
I can't wait to bomb some dodongos!
Now, hold on a sec. You might be awfully curious as to why I say this.
Yeah, I am awfully curious.
Hey, hold on a second. Who are you and what the fuck are you doing in my video? Oh, wait, you're in the title. For those that don't know...
For those of you who don't know, I'm one of his peers who appeared in his prior videos, and am a certified true Zelda fan.
The Zelda franchise is one of gaming's most critically acclaimed and famous series ever, and a flagship saga for Nintendo. Now let me acquaint to you, my dear audience, despite the association with Zelda in the title, the Zelda CDI games are another one of those games categorized and cited as some of the most appalling video games and media ever created.
And rightfully so. All these games are stupid lazy cash grabs using Nintendo's IPs, licensed to them, littered with poor gameplay, graphics, and cringeworthy storytelling.
That may look as if on the surface, but there is truly more to these games than meets the eye. Once again, I am here to prove all those naysayers wrong, including you, and showcase the many positives and reasons as to why the Zelda CDI games are a trilogy that is truly masterful.
All you're going to prove is that you are crazy and have a dogshit taste in games.
Why did I even invite you in the first place?
I thought this was going to be an actual review for an actual Zelda game, but no, you're just talking about these trash heaps in gaming.
Mark my words, by the end of this video, you and the audience will be convinced of these games' greatness. As some of you most likely know, the Legend of Zelda series is a game series created by the one and only Nintendo and Shigeru Miyamoto. However, the Zelda CDI games are one of those rare occasions where Nintendo did not have a hand in creating the game itself, along with not being published by an official Nintendo console. Both being released on October 10th of 1993, these games were a project part of the collaboration between Nintendo and Philips to get licensed Nintendo games on the Philips CDI console, and partly created by the Animation Magic development team.
It's commonly considered the abortion of the Zelda franchise, because Nintendo later dropped their deal with Philips in 1996 after seeing how much of a commercial failure the CDI was as a whole, and officially denounced the CDI Zelda games as non-canon.
Despite this being a collaborative effort between Nintendo and Philips, Nintendo only at first had faith in Philips at the time, having much different ideas in mind with their material.
Gee, I wonder why.
Regardless of the split in ideas between Nintendo and Philips that was present during the earlier stages of the CDI's lifespan, the development team responsible for the CDI Zelda games still attempted to be as faithful to Nintendo's wishes as possible.
You consider this abomination faithful? I've seen 6-year-old Link fan art more faithful than these. I've seen fanfics with Zelda cheating on Link more faithful than this. So it makes these games possess any privilege and faithfulness.
Well, the team at Philips considered asking Nintendo for help at all times, and what types of approaches Nintendo would see fit for Philips to take with their Zelda games. Unlike the goofiness and WTF art direction with Windwaker, the team went for accuracy over experimentation. That's all being said without even bringing up the fact that Nintendo was pretty negligent and refused to help Philips' team with their efforts.
That's because Philips' ideas were actually brain dead. Who in their right mind at Nintendo would want to make another Zelda 2 Link's Adventure styled game? And unlike this analysis so far, they at least have some nerve to admit that they were somewhat ashamed in their games.
Actually, following the release of the big success of the CDI games, Nintendo apologized for being a bunch of jerk cops, and furthermore being proof that Philips and Animation Magic were a dedicated and fantastic team that could make anything into a good story. And if they weren't swept under the rug, the success of the development and creative team would have hailed to the ranks of things like Bubsy or Superman 64.
None of those games were actually praised.
Kinda like the begrudging Philips and Nintendo collab, I myself have faith in my partner featured in the video here, who will eventually see the masterstroke of the painting of this game is, as evident with what has been said already. So are you convinced yet?
Not at all. I'm about as convinced as a flat earther being told the earth is round.
Now, one of the Zelda series' most trivial and notorious peculiarities is its storyline. Regardless of how good it is, it's still incredibly complex and convoluted.
But this guy doesn't even know that Zelda is actually not the main character.
Why I let him say that and allowed that clip to slip through editing, I have no idea. But what I do know is that the team at Philips succeeded at making a fantastic freelance story on their own just by their incredibly limited and scarce resources, having to even resort to loose Zelda game manuals inside recycling bins outside of Nintendo HQ, but still managed to create fantastic literature. The plot synopsis for each Zelda CDI game involves playing as either Link or Zelda within the island kingdom of Koridai, under the rule of Zelda's first father, King Harkinian, and they must save the kingdom under attack by the evil forces of Ganon, and save each other and vice versa. That's the story. None of that time travel, ripple in time bullshit Majora's Mask had, none of the Skyward Sword timeline confusion bullshit, just a plain and simple adventure game.
And this is why they are non-canon, because they stoop down to a level of intelligence for a dumb audience. You've got to have a pretty high IQ to understand the Zelda timeline at its fullest.
That sounds like something a Rick and Morty stan would.
Each game is intertwined in a masterful way, and the unique experience you have when searching for all the pieces of the puzzle to piece together a story, and the classic cast of characters you get to meet aren't even the main characters most of the time. If your story is so well told that even the side characters, whether it be good or bad, are memorable, then you've got Lord of the Rings material in your hands.
Now, the Zelda CDI games also possess this kind of material, as there are many memorable characters you meet along the way. Some of the colorful cast of characters here includes King Harkinian, Morshu, and everyone's favorite side character, Habrano.
My cakes will burn!
Now, not only that, the whole plot of the games is to venture through many foreign territories just like an open world game, and each area has an immersive ambient feel to them that will basically be remembered and glued into your head forever.
Okay, so one looks like Skyrim, and the other looks like a 90-year-old's desktop background, but please, continue.
This reminds me of a little hunch theory that I've formulated.
What's that? That the haters are wrong and I'm the one that's crazy?
Good idea, but no. Anywho, the titles of the CDI Zelda games are perhaps a metaphor for Nintendo's negligence of the Philips' brilliant ideas and concepts behind the scenes. These titles reflect in the narrative and emulate what it's like for a worker at Philips during its collaboration with Nintendo. Link represents being the face of Philips, the faces of evil being Nintendo and its many heads, and Zelda representing the development team and its many adventures.
What about the Wand of Gamelon representation in this baseless claim of yours?
Well, that part of the theory is simply a work in progress. Speaking of baseless, unlike traditional Zelda games, the CDI Zelda games have one thing that is particularly famous about it, and the one thing that at least kept the game's good name afloat for years now.
God, don't even get me started on these horrendous cutscenes.
No, hold on, punk. What did you say?
Well, excuse me. I just said the cutscenes were bad.
If there is one thing that you do not talk about negatively when it comes to the CDI games, it's the cutscenes. But I still respect your opinion.
This.
Well, there's a very good reason why these cutscenes are so fondly remembered. On the surface, it looks just like another run-of-the-mill mid-90s MS Paint project, and due to this, and many people's lack of college-level arts experience, has people's perceptions warped, lacking much context to the development of the games through the 90s.
Instead of taking their time like the real Zelda development team, Philips rushes to pump out something quickly under a deadline, just to make a quick buck off the character names and set pieces.
You just described every EA game ever.
And they can't even get Zelda to look right. This alone proves my point, and why games such as Ocarina of Time and Breath of the Wild are far better than the pitiful CDI Zelda games. Am I the only one who's going crazy here or something?
Well, don't fret, that's only because you seem to lack context of these games.
You and the word context don't seem to go hand in hand.
Due to the lack of funds and general help Philips received from Nintendo, Animation Magic threw their hat in the ring to help produce and come up with original ideas for cutscenes. This was pretty ambitious for a Zelda game at the time, too.
Arguably unneeded.
They gained the courage to do this, and thanks to the legendary Cool World animator Don Bluth, who showed the team how to properly animate in under a single minute.
Actually, I just fact-checked that information, and it was actually animated by a 19-person Russian team of amateur animators within the Animation Magic team, all possessing a lack of seasoned experience in the field of art.
And Don Bluth.
See, this is exactly why nobody talks fondly of these games, because it just breeds stupidity and bad preferences.
No, you and everybody else are just socially manipulated and narrow-minded. The nerve of people sometimes, am I right? There's a decent amount to be said about the script writing of the game too. While not the deepest and most literary rich game out there, there's something to be admired here for anyone. The jokes, for example, are probably my favorite part about the game's sweeping dialogue, possessing the same vibe as the 80s TV show did.
Oh boy! I'm so hungry, I could eat an Octorok! You've killed me!
Good.
Honestly, I liked it a lot better when Link didn't talk.
Another importance that the CDI Zelda cutscenes possess is a groundbreaking part in modern internet culture. With its mass appeal and the snippets throughout, came many opportunities for YouTube poops. I cannot stress enough how influential YouTube poops are, and a part of that was due to how the incorporation of the cutscenes from Zelda CDI drew unfamiliar peoples to the game's greatness, the YouTube poops sometimes being even greater than the cutscenes itself, but rarely.
As much as I hate these games, yes, I do happen to agree here for once.
You've become open-minded for once.
YouTube poops somehow increase the non-existent appeal these games possess with them and make it entertaining as hell.
We finally have an understanding.
Okay, there is no reason why this segment should be here. 1, it has no integrity making an analysis on how good a video game is. And 2, there's no way that the CDI Zelda games have any sex appeal to them. Nowadays, you've got thick Zelda, shirtless Link, Midna if you want to be extra weird, not to mention Sidon if you want to be extra weird and gay. And with all these options, the CDI games simply can't compete with modern Zelda.
Yeah, they're pretty hot and all, but it doesn't beat King Hunkanan.
Well, you can't be serious. Holy shit, I might be gay.
Earlier on in the video, we talked about how the games were specifically blueprinted by Zelda 2's game structure. This is an ambitious move considering at the time everyone was accustomed to the traditional top-down open world like Zelda games had. That being said, the gameplay of these games is actually a massive improvement.
I personally don't hate the ambition of the route and the gameplay style they took, but it was executed so damn poorly. Zelda 2 was already really weird in style from your traditional open world top-down adventure game, but at least that game has some saving graces in that it created staples of the Zelda franchise for years to come, and most importantly, it's actually fun to play. Pretty difficult, but fun.
I mean, the CDI games also had staples to them that play a role in future Zelda games, despite not being canon. For one, in the Wand of Gamelon, it's the first game that features Zelda as a playable character. See, I know who's who. Not only this, but the games hold the true title of first Zelda game to feature voice acting.
Come to think of it, that is pretty cool, I guess. Despite the terrible voice acting abilities, I'd say that it's pretty experimental for their time, as not many games are doing this then, and it could be argued that all these staples would indeed be incorporations to later Zelda games. That all being said, I still stick to the idea that these games are garbage.
When you begin to play the game, you're greeted with a tutorial. This is actually really unique and helpful, particularly for a Zelda game. It's not often that a character interacts with you and creates a helpful dynamic to the audience to relate to.
When I'm crouching, you can make me do the duck walk.
Yeah, because crab walking is relatable to anyone who doesn't live in an asylum. And the fact that they need to play out a tutorial for you presents to me that this game has a sad lack of faith in its audience. Traditional Zelda games have at least a comprehensive and entertaining box art, while these ones have a lame-ass jewel case with the feel of an educational game.
Tutorials aside, the objective of the game is to go around and defeat every area of the map in order to gain items and abilities to progress through the game and eventually defeat Ganon. You've got an X amount of hearts to survive off of, similar to every other Zelda game, along with a magic sword that can shoot magic beams and a shield to block projectiles. You can use rupees to buy new items at the shops, and some of these items prove to be important in the game's progression. Kinda like a wild hybrid between Zelda 2 and Super Mario Bros. 3, but let me also be realistic here and say that the gameplay doesn't go without its flaws. When you pick up a rupee, you must click on it instead of running up to grab it.
Why on earth would you have to hit pedestrians and helpers with your sword in order to get them to talk? It's like you're holding them at gunpoint.
According to the game's lore, it's known as a smart sword, where it never hurts anyone that's considered good and encourages those people to talk, but will do wonders of damage to those who are deemed bad.
Very odd explanation, but somehow convincing. Convincing in the sense that it's just written here in the lore as a cover-up to hide bad game design.
Now, another criticism I've got to point out about the game that I have is the confusing background layout. Yeah, these are pretty cool looking pieces of art, but the layout of how the platforming interacts with the player is super confusing and difficult to decipher. A game can look pretty cool and gorgeous, but the gameplay has to be at least good in order to be playable. Well, at least the control is smooth and overall pretty good.
You gotta be kidding me.
In the same vein as what you just said, the music of the game is definitely not a joke. I don't bring up the soundtrack for many game reviews like this, but I've got to give credit where credit is due. Like seriously, some of this music is pure banger material.
Speaking of banger music, I don't know how this even relates to music, but aren't we forgetting another CDI Zelda game? We've talked about the gross demon spawn litter that is Faces of Evil and Wand of Gamelon, but what about...
Yes, my friend. I was just about to get there. As much as I think these games are good, I'm gonna have to admit that the third and last game release, Zelda's Adventure, is a noticeable downgrade. Don't get me wrong, the game has obvious effort and care put into the game, but it doesn't hold a candle to the prior two games' charm and effort. Released a whole year after the Faces of Evil and Wand of Gamelon in 1994, and this game, unlike the other two Zelda CDI games, was developed by Veritas Corporation.
And I thought you were going to make sense for 1 second and admit that at least one of these games suck.
Considering this factor, one thing you're bound to notice upon first glance is the glaring lack of art direction the game as opposed to the prior two games. They went the route of rotoscoping the animated cutscenes instead of getting the same animation team of the prior games to do it, making this game look a lot more like a Netflix adaptation of an anime than an actual game.
Look at these atrocious pieces of animation. It's not like the prior two games' animation is any better. Let me get this off my back. The traditional Zelda games had the best way to portray each game using the potential of the individual system it was on, and they made it work, making each scene funny, emotional, and intricate to the plot. The team for the the CDI Zelda games, on the other hand, tried way too hard to make it look ahead of its time, especially due to their massive lack of resources.
There isn't much to talk about this game,
Like there was any reason to talk about this trilogy entirely.
but I'll still give it my 2 cents about it. Not only me, but everyone else in the world at the time seemed to notice its lack of quality in comparison to the prior 2 marvels, leading for the game's sales to suffer. I mean, just look at the price differences between these games and you'll see which ones sold the best. Why they chose to settle and switch development teams with an obviously inferior one, I have no clue. The plot is totally foreign to the rest of the prior games. No Korodai, no Harkinian, none of the familiarity in the prior games that would have otherwise made this game more appealing. It's all gone. Instead of a side-scrolling platformer adventure game, it opted with the traditional top-down generic adventure game route. Thus, all uniqueness of the prior 2 CDI Zelda games removed from the game. The music in particular was an absolute downgrade. I couldn't even pick out a backing track for this video due to how boring the music was.
Yes, now we're somewhat on the same page.
But at least there are somewhat ambient, good sleepy time songs.
And you lost me.
Between all 3, it's hard to say which one is truly the best.
Definitely
Definitely
not
not
Zelda's
Zelda's Adventure. Evident from this video, however, is a game that has loads more passion than many of the AAA titles today. The game supposedly could have been even better if it had more support been pushed for these games, and if the hardware wasn't so limiting. Even without these upgrades, the game still stands as a cult classic in many people's eyes. This video is definitely not a ventilation of my personal silly opinions, but a true tour de force of analytical review, meant personally only for those who truly understand greatness, like my partner here who starred in this video.
Yeah, as much as I hate these games and firmly believe that they tarnish the grandeur of the Zelda name, I have to agree with him here. There's a specific kind of charm that can be experienced with these games, kind of like a so bad it's good kind of way. Another thing that I recognized during this analysis is that the games are not as bad as most traumatized players make them seem. It's these factors that make the game worth checking out at least once, but only once.
That's a very fair stand on the game, as opposed to blindly hating it. His placement through the video is definitely not a meta-commentary for the view based on how snobby people are and doubt can simply be convinced that the CDI games are good. And as a rational thinker, I stand by the privilege that everybody has their own opinion to be formed and their own take on things, and that if you as the audience like or dislike these games, that's perfectly okay.
As a rational Zelda fan, and someone that respects your opinion, I still stick to my mindset. All 3 of these games suck harder than having to go on eBay to search for a lighter, and instead getting shipped hundreds of matches.
You know what? Fuck it. The Zelda CDI games all blow in comparison to Hotel Mario.